The sun hung low over the vast, barren desert, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Heat waves shimmered off the cracked earth, distorting the horizon like a mirage. The wind was dry, carrying the scent of dust and distant smoke. Somewhere in this desolate expanse, far from civilization, a black SUV tore through the terrain, its tires kicking up a thick cloud of sand. The vehicle's reinforced steel frame and tinted windows suggested it belonged to men who preferred to operate in the shadows, men who answered to no law but their own. Inside, four cartel enforcers sat in tense silence, their rifles resting on their laps. The men had done this before. To them, it was just another job, just another message to be sent. Their captive was slumped in the back seat between two of them, his head bowed, wrists tightly bound behind his back with zip ties. His uniform, once crisp and clean, was now stained with sweat, dirt, and streaks of blood from the blows he had endured. The cartel soldiers smirked at the sight of him, another border agent who had stepped too far into their world. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. Before we get into this unbelievable story of survival and retribution, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We bring you the most gripping real-life stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's get back to the action. Michael Reynolds had lived a life that few could imagine. Decades of service as a Navy SEAL had hardened him, forged him into something more than just a soldier. He had seen the worst of humanity and had fought in wars that no one talked about. But war had a way of following men like him, even when they tried to leave it behind. After retiring from the SEALs, Reynolds had sought something quieter, something that would give him purpose without the constant violence. The Border Patrol had seemed like a good fit. He could still serve, still protect people, but without the endless deployments, without the ghosts of fallen brothers haunting his every step. But there was no escaping the fight. It found him again one quiet evening when a distress call crackled over his radio. An unmapped route near the border, unusual vehicle activity, possible smuggling operation. Routine stuff, or so it seemed. Reynolds had responded without hesitation, following the tire tracks into the desert. The moment he saw the abandoned vehicle, he knew something was wrong. The doors were open, the engine still warm, but there were no signs of a struggle. He reached for his radio, but before he could speak, a sharp rustling in the brush behind him sent his instincts into overdrive. Then came the ambush. A black SUV roared onto the path in front of him, cutting off his escape. The doors burst open, and masked men poured out, moving with the efficiency of trained killers. Reynolds reacted instantly, drawing his sidearm and firing. The first shot took down a man before he could raise his rifle. The second bullet found another target. But there were too many. A rifle butt crashed into the side of his head, and the world spun into darkness. Now, bound and bruised in the back of the cartel's vehicle, Reynolds kept his breathing slow, his mind sharp. He knew exactly what these men had planned for him. He had seen enough cartel executions to know how this story usually ended. They would take him to a remote location, beat him until he was unrecognizable, record his final moments, and send the footage back as a warning. He would be nothing more than another statistic, another name on a growing list of the dead. But Michael Reynolds wasn't just another name. The vehicle jolted as it veered off the main road, bouncing over rough terrain. They were headed for a safe house, a place where no one would hear the screams. The men around him were relaxed, too comfortable in their assumed dominance. That was their first mistake. Reynolds took stock of his surroundings. The driver was focused on the road, barely paying attention to the prisoner in the back. The man in the passenger seat had a pistol in his waistband but wasn't holding it. The two men beside Reynolds had rifles, but they were resting lazily against their legs. Sloppy. The vehicle hit a deep rut in the dirt road, sending a violent jolt through the cabin. That was all the opening he needed. In one explosive movement, Reynolds twisted his body, driving his bound fists into the ribs of the man on his left. The impact was precise, aimed at the floating rib, and the enforcer let out a sharp, breathless gasp as pain overtook him. Before the second man could react, Reynolds spun, bringing his knee up into his face, smashing cartilage and sending a spray of blood onto the seat. The SUV swerved wildly as the driver yelled in confusion. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing the pistol from the passenger's waistband, twisting just enough to free his hands from the zip ties in the process. The moment his fingers wrapped around the cold steel of the gun, his body moved on instinct. 2 shots. The driver slumped forward, his hands slipping from the wheel. The SUV spun out of control, tires skidding across the loose gravel before flipping over. The world turned into a blur of metal, dust, and chaos. Then, silence. Reynolds groaned as he pulled himself from the wreckage, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. He had been through worse. The 2 men in the back were dead. The driver was motionless. The passenger, however, was still breathing, groaning in pain. Reynolds stepped over the broken glass and debris, grabbing the man by his collar. "Where's the compound?" His voice was calm, ice cold. The cartel enforcer trembled, blood trickling from a deep cut on his forehead. You won't make it," he spat. Reynolds didn't ask twice. A single, brutal punch sent the man into unconsciousness. He didn't need him to talk. He had seen the lights in the distance, the compound. With only a pistol and a knife taken from the wreckage, Reynolds moved like a ghost through the desert, his footsteps silent in the sand. Inside the compound, cartel members laughed and drank, celebrating what they thought was a victory. They had no idea that death was coming for them. One by one, Reynolds took them down. A knife to the throat, a silenced shot in the dark. He moved like the predator he had trained to be, eliminating the men before they even realized they were under attack. By the time the alarm was raised, it was too late. The last man standing was their leader, a high-ranking lieutenant. He had been expecting his men to return with a broken prisoner. Instead, he found himself staring into the cold, unrelenting eyes of a Navy SEAL. "You picked the wrong man," Reynolds said, his voice barely above a whisper. The lieutenant begged for his life, promising money, power, anything. Reynolds left him breathing, but barely. He had one message: tell them. The border isn't theirs to control. As Reynolds disappeared into the desert night, he knew the fight wasn't over. The cartel would come looking for him. But now, they knew the truth. They had messed with the wrong man. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible tales of survival, courage, and justice. What would you have done in Reynolds' place? Let us know in the comments below.